Welcome to the Play Review with me, Douglas Schatz. Today, I have a special guest joining me to help review some of the shows that I've seen in recent weeks. She is Jodi Rilot, who is not only an impassioned theatre goer, but also a theatre director in her own right, having just finished directing her first show at the Putney Arts Theatre in London. The show was Mayfly by Joe White, which some may recall was first seen at the Orange Tree Theatre in Richmond back in 2018. The play is a moving exploration of family grief, and for a debut work, it is neatly structured and well written, and Jodi did a wonderful job with it, with a very fine cast. Congratulations, Jodi, and welcome to the Play Review.
Thank you very much. It was lovely of you to come and see Mayfly. It was a great experience. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, yeah, it was a great experience for the audience too. Thanks for doing it. As it happens, the first play that we're going to talk about today is also to be found at the Orange Tree Theatre in Richmond. It is The Circle by Somerset Maugham, a play which was written more than 100 years ago in 1921. It is the first production at the Orange Tree, directed by the new artistic director, Tom Littler. I must confess that I did not know this play. In fact, I think that I would be hard-pressed to name a single play written by Maugham, and this despite the fact that he was a hugely successful playwright in his time, to the extent that between 1907 and 1909, he had 4 plays running simultaneously in the West End. His plays were produced right up into the 1930s, though I do know him more for his short stories and novels, including Of Human Bondage, The Razor's Edge, and Cakes and Ale, for example. So I felt drawn to see The Circle in order to discover something of Somerset Maugham, the playwright. What attracted you to go to see The Circle, Jodi? Did you know this play or Maugham, the playwright?
I did not. I mean, like you, I knew him as a novelist, as a short story writer, but not a playwright. And I wouldn't normally be drawn to, I'm not really a kind of comedy of manners type. I like to go to see more contemporary plays. I love new writing or reimagined versions of old classics in quite an interesting way. So it wouldn't normally be the kind of thing I'd go to see. Drawn to it because it was a big gap. I was really surprised to discover, like you, that he was famous as a playwright way before he was famous as a novelist. And because it's the first of Tom Littler, who's the new artistic director at the Orange Tree, so because I wanted to go and see that and support the theatre. It's my local theatre. I love it. So I went along for that reason. And also what I'm discovering is I think I know what I like and what I don't like. And then I go and see things and I'm often surprised. And I was surprised with this. I thought I would find it a little bit mannered, but I actually found it hugely entertaining and I'm very glad that I went.
Really interesting about being open-minded or not, or thinking you know what you like. I was a little bit like that most of my life about musicals, for example. And then when I worked at Samuel French, I was obliged to go and see quite a lot of musicals and surprised to find that I actually enjoyed a number of them, especially the newer, more contemporary ones. Mm-hmm. And like you, I agree. I had a slight reservations about the choice of this play by Tom Littler, thinking, oh my goodness, this is a bit old-fashioned kind of comedy of manners thing. But again, the Maugham bit, I thought, well, I should go and check this out. This is a gap in my knowledge. And also one of the listeners to the Play podcast actually wrote in and said, you should do The Circle by Somerset Maugham. I couldn't believe it. I'd never heard of it. Anyway, despite our reservations, let's try and give a brief account of the story in the play. I'll have a first crack at it if you don't mind, but please feel free to jump in to help if I missed anything.
Will do.
The play's set in the country house belonging to Arnold Champion Cheney, which he has inherited from his father, Clive Champion Cheney, not because Clive dies, but because 30 years ago, the house was the scene of a personal and public scandal when Arnold's mother, Lady Catherine, ran off with Clive's best friend. And Clive doesn't want to live in the house anymore, so his son has taken it over. Lady Catherine and her partner, Lord Porteous, fled abroad, having been socially ostracized, and have been living in Florence ever since. Arnold is married to Elizabeth, who is restless with romantic inclinations that her dull husband is not satisfying, but which may be fulfilled by one of Arnold's friends, Teddy Luton, who is visiting from Malaya, where he runs a plantation and lives the English expat life. Teddy declares his love for Elizabeth and tempts her to run away with him to Malaya. Elizabeth thus emulating Lady Catherine's bad behavior, so that both generations of champion Cheney men find themselves cuckolded and abandoned, or may do. The action of the play is precipitated by Lady Catherine and Lord Porteous returning to England for the first time in 30 years, and unbeknownst to either Arnold or his father, Elizabeth has invited them to come to stay. Arnold is not keen to see his mother, having been abandoned as a child, but somewhat unexpectedly, Clive embraces the opportunity to meet his ex again. And when he sees that she and Porteous are not getting along very well, he takes every opportunity to goad them, which he seems to enjoy doing enormously, to the point that Lady Catherine suggests at one point that perhaps they should get back together. I won't give away the ending of who ends up with whom, but suffice to say, we witness some fraught scenes of romantic anguish and hijinks. So that's a bit of a summary. Did I miss anything, Jodi?
Excellent. No, that was an excellent summary.
Well, I had to take a little while to prepare that one. So what did you like about the play and the production?
So the standout for me was the three older characters. So, I mean, I don't know how old Jane Asher is and Clive Francis and Nicholas Le Provost, but they must be edging into their 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they just crackled every time they were on stage. That is particularly when the three of them are goading and bickering and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny. And the twinkle in their eye as they're going through it, I just felt their joy as actors. They were loving playing these flawed and funny characters. So that I thought was an absolute joy to watch, and not at all what I was expecting from the three of them. So I really loved that.
I was just going to jump in and agree with you about Clive Francis in particular, who I thought was stand out as Clive. A twinkle in his eye is absolutely spot on. He played that with such relish.
Yeah.
And he has wonderful comic timing and the wit. I was really struck, of course, by the language, and he delivers it with real aplomb.
Yeah, he really does. And he just has this phenomenal presence the whole time he was there. He just seems so very, very relaxed, but the whole time you are so aware that you're in the presence of a truly great actor. So that was an absolute treat. I really genuinely loved that.
I think, again, sorry, I'm just going to stay with this one with Clive, because you were absolutely spot on about that comfort on the stage. I just saw, actually, this is a complete tangent, but Midsummer Night's Dream at the Globe, and Michelle Terry gives a standout performance as Puck. And one of the things I noted about that is he just is so comfortable on the stage and commands it in a way that the audience therefore relaxes. It takes, I think, years of experience, as well as some natural gift, to get to that point where you have that kind of confidence to be able to command the stage.
Yeah, it's an ease, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I was fortunate enough to go along to see a bit of their tech rehearsal.
Oh, great.
They were all incredibly gracious and seemed very at ease with one another. And I wonder if that might well have been something that Tom Littler went out of his way to encourage in his cast, or whether it was just spectacular casting and that natural chemistry existed amongst them. It was really interesting to watch.
Well, that translated to the performances and to their relationships, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did.
What about Jane Asher? It's celebrity casting in a way, isn't it? And she plays the faded glamour puss Lady Catherine. I thought she was pretty well cast.
Oh, she was exceptionally well cast. And at first, when she comes on the stage, particularly if you're not familiar with the play, you have a moment of going, oh dear, Jane, you're really not aging gracefully, are you? But of course, that's the very heart of the character. So it was so well done, that with her glorious, spectacular red hair, which she confesses, you'll never believe, but it's not natural, darling. Like, really, I touch it up. Do you? I would never have guessed. So I thought she played that beautifully. She was clearly enjoying that again. And the costumes were just gorgeous. Those bias cut 1930s gowns and everything were glorious. I did feel that she could have shown a little more of the vulnerability behind that character, the tenuous nature of being a person who traded always on their beauty. And it's in the words, it's in the script.
Definitely.
But I wasn't sure that convinced quite as much as the faded glamour, pretending you're 20, 30 years younger than you are.
So she's playing that role where she's working excessively hard to preserve her appearance beyond what is tasteful for her years. And that's deliberate because she has this theory about women's place in society and how it's dependent on having a man and retaining your man. And that her appearance is very much one of the weapons in her arsenal to do so, if not the only weapon, which, as you say, that can be quite poignant, actually. But I never really felt all that attracted to her and to that dilemma, frankly.
Yeah. And I think that was a shame because that could have been really one of the central contemporary themes in the play, actually, this sense that what is a woman's place in society? Does she have to be in the structure of a formal marriage or relationship? What happens when you choose to do something different, to be self-actualized and to go off and live a different life? Essentially, she was punished for it. She was ostracized. She had to live this very, very narrow, very shallow life. She had to abandon her children. So that whole side of her character, that's a whole side of her identity, had to be left behind as well.
That's true.
So I just felt that could have just stood out a little bit more because she was very clear that, frankly, her position is fragile. She lived very much on the whim of Hughie.
Yeah.
And if he decided to turn her over for somebody new, then what had she left?
Yeah, and it's, of course, one of the themes in the way the play is structured is about how the next generation view or replicate the same mistakes or choices. So that, interestingly, towards the end, Catherine tries to discourage Elizabeth from making the same mistake as her and running away with Teddy for love, warning her, this great phrase, that men are not in love all day long.
That was great. She had some of the best lines.
So, as she knows only too well, of course, that once a woman's looks fade, she has nothing to rely on to sustain the man's interest, as we said. And she counsels Elizabeth that she absolutely must ensure that she gets married as well, not just run away, so as to be financially secure.
Yeah.
So ruthlessly pragmatic based on her experience. As you mentioned, Nicholas Flippervost, he also did a very nice job as the curmudgeonly partner, I thought. He was curmudgeonly throughout, was he not?
His grumbling was just priceless. It's so good. And his weariness that, essentially that he didn't win. He was the one who was kind of lumbered with her. And Clive's delight. He was delighting in his single life and delighting in rubbing her nose in it. I mean, it shouldn't have been as funny as it was, but it was very funny.
It's interesting you mentioned because, of course, grumbling may not actually be in the script, but I think he probably did a bit of ad lib there. I mean, you're right that those three stood out because the younger generation, I think, were weirdly less interesting. Pete Ashmore, who has the rather thankless part of the stick in the mud Arnold. I mean, he did a good job with that, but it's a pretty thankless part, it seemed to me. And then Olivia Vinal, who did Elizabeth, and that was fine. It's a sort of a ludicrously self-centered, romantically deluded part. But I also wasn't sure at all about Chirag Benedict Lobo as Teddy. I don't know. What did you think of that performance?
Well, just first of all, on the three, I wasn't very invested in their relationships and their stories, which is quite telling.
Yeah.
You should really care what outcome. Will she, won't she? Will she stay, will she go? It was almost incidental, which is telling. I was not convinced of Teddy in as much as I wasn't convinced of, I didn't feel the chemistry between him and Elizabeth. And he was meant to be, he was described as this sort of playful, flamboyant, quite frivolous, but enormously entertaining person that you would always have at your parties. So therefore, the sort of charismatic, attractive person that red flags would be flying, going, oh, is really this the sort of man you should run away with? But he didn't convince for me as that sparkling person that you would always invite to your country home to liven up the weekend. And I'm sure it was a deliberate choice in terms of directing and character. He was quite a glowering presence, I felt. And therefore I was less convinced of, and maybe again this was deliberate, why was Elizabeth attracted to him? Was she attracted to him, or was she just attracted to any idea of escape and adventure from this sort of gilded cage she was in? And you could have replaced Teddy with any other person who might have offered her an out. And perhaps that was deliberate.
There is some truth, I think, thematically in that from the very start, quite strangely, Elizabeth seems determined to live some romantic life, some idea she's got. Again, from the example set by Arnold's mother. I agree with you. I didn't feel like I cared that much about that relationship, but also that he was trying too hard, I felt, to do this kind of louche, well, sort of English, but actually he was a South Asian colonial character.
Yeah.
So somewhat of an outsider. And maybe that informs his trying too hard. But as a performance, it felt like he was trying too hard to be this rambunctious pretender somehow, but his diction was very fruity and he had this strange fixed smile, which once I fixed on, I couldn't ignore. And actually, in some ways, I suppose I know that all these characters are caricatures of sorts, but he seemed even more of one somehow.
Yeah, I did. They were a bit of a pen sketch. So much more of a vehicle for the three older ones. And that played beautifully. What a joy to be somewhere like the Orange Tree Theatre on a Monday night, and it was packed. There was not an empty seat. And, the average age was probably nearer to Jane Asher than it was to, say, my sons. But, that's okay. These are the people who were very frightened during COVID and who've been very slow to come back to theatre. So how wonderful to see this place full of the octogenarians who embrace this sort of play.
I went to a matinee, a busy schedule, and I still have this sense that I'm playing hooky or something when I go to the theater in the afternoon. But you're right, the audience was similarly composed and it was sold out, which is great. And it's a lovely little theater.
Yeah, it is.
So overall, what do you make of it? It sounds like you really enjoyed it, but except I was also, for a lot of the time, I go back to our original thinking about this type of thing. I did feel at times that the shenanigans of these characters, what you might call the careless rich, are pretty silly. And I couldn't really care one way or another.
Oh, yeah.
So I did enjoy some of the clever language and the humor and the spark of those performances. But I was trying to figure out what's the point of all this ultimately. I enjoyed the effervescence of the production, I guess. Tom did a great job with it, I think.
Yeah.
But I suppose I was thinking that it was a bit insubstantial. It's like eating candy floss or something. It's a ridiculous food stuff. It isn't really food, and it's not very substantial. But on the other hand, what was interesting was the undercurrent of a kind of acerbic view of love and marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Which was in my mind because I just saw quite recently as well Coward's Private Lives. And this reminded me very much and prefigures, I think, that play and Coward's approach to love and marriage. Did you feel that as well?
Yeah, very much so. I was really pleased I saw both of them in the same week.
Ah, yeah, brilliant. Because Tom Littler himself has drawn a line in the program at the Orange Tree from Oscar Wilde through Somerset Maugham to Noël Coward and even to Terence Rattigan in the history of English playwriting. And you can see the connections, particularly, I think, with the first three. The settings in these well-to-do drawing rooms are somewhat, as I described, the careless rich and the bright epigrammatic wit with which they write. But it's also underscored by these darker currents and a more sardonic worldview, I think.
Yeah.
Mainly arising from inappropriate relationships.
Yeah, that's right, which never gets old, right? I mean, we've seen it in Succession, characters being badly behaved towards one another. It's still something we love to watch. So fundamentally, would I recommend it worth a trip out to the Orange Tree to take a look at it? I definitely would. Go see it.
Yeah.
It's a fun night. It's interesting to discover a playwright that you didn't know and to see the performances of Clive Francis in particular. Definitely worth a night out.
Yeah, and I do think that undercurrent is worth observing, and it adds something to what you might think is otherwise just a light drawing room comedy.
Yeah.
The circle continues at the Orange Tree Theatre in Richmond-upon-Thames until the 17th of June. I know that the Donmar production of Private Lives has just finished, but I'd love to hear what you thought of that, given that you saw it in the same week. It was an interesting interpretation, wasn't it?
Well, again, so I haven't seen any other Private Lives. Again, I don't go and see Noël Coward plays. It's just a preconceived idea that I'd find it dull. What could possibly interest me? And yet again, surprised because I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I can't compare to previous productions. All I can say is that the audience here was a bunch of school kids predominantly. I inadvertently went on what must have been a school night. The average age was about 17.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, these poor kids, what are they going to get out of this? It went up in 1930, written by an overprivileged white man. about two very overprivileged white couples set in the 1930s. Poor kids. They loved it.
No,
They loved it.
that's brilliant.
I mean, you couldn't have had two more different audiences from The Circle to Private Lives that night. It was things like, first of all, their absolute thrill at knowing that on those two adjacent balconies, that the ex-husband and ex-wife, as one went out and the other came in, their apparent delight at this very simple idea that any minute now they were going to bump into one another, and their delight when they did, and then their thrill at seeing, probably seeing people in their 50s kissing is just disgusting to them, but the thrill in the audience of that, of seeing actual kissing in real life on stage in front of you, it was just a joy to behold. And then when it degenerated into, that acerbic fighting and then becomes physical, when he hits her,
Yeah.
I thought they were going to storm the stage and pull him off her.
Oh, wow. Great.
They were so shocked and vocal about it. And then at one stage, Amanda punches Elliot in the privates, basically, and they cheered. And as the lights go down, he's bent double and Amanda is pummeling him on the back. And the place was in uproar, cheering her on and clapping. When the lights went down, the place erupted.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It was fantastic. I was really moved by it. I thought, theatre won't ever be dead if we keep taking young people to theatre and them seeing stuff like this.
That's very encouraging. And of course, it plays to that point that we're also concerned about, that actually schools are not going to the theatre as much as they used to. They're not getting the funding to do so. Anyway, we mustn't go down that route, or we could be sometime railing against the world.
Yeah, we could be. A different podcast episode. But that was utterly joyful. And to hear the chat at the interval around, one boy was saying, well, she started the heat. She did hit that record thing over his head. And one of the girls said, are you saying that she was asking for it? I don't really do. He said, I'm not saying she was asking for it. I'm just saying it was 50-50. So they were engaged in the theme and the debate. So I'm sure it was, the violence in it was shocking, but I'm sure it's in the text.
Oh, well, we'll talk about that. So a couple of things come out of what you're saying. One is, yes, absolutely, the structure of the play. I mean, Coward is so clever, that setting of the two couples on the adjoining terraces and how he manipulates that and creates the suspense. It's so simple, but brilliantly done. You're right. It's the violence that's most distinctive, I think, about this production. They really do get stuck in to some surprising and robust physical fighting, as you've described. Michael Longhurst, the director, would say he was presenting the literal truth of Coward's stage directions and what's in the text, because there are references in the text to the fact that Elliot hits Amanda, for example. And there's that shocking line when Elliot says that certain women should be struck regularly like gongs. In this day and age, that is so stark. But then you actually see it being played out. It's definitely darker than it usually would be played. And that's one of the interesting features, as we started to say about Coward, really, is that you think of him as, it's all going to be lightweight comedy. Actually, there is this dark undercurrent. I did a full-length podcast for the Play Podcast on Private Lives with Oliver Soden, who's just written a really fascinating new biography of Coward. And we talked, obviously, a lot about this. And Coward had a pretty bleak view about romantic and sexual relationships, which is played out in many of his plays, and in particular Private Lives. And I was thinking that, like Somerset Maugham as well, and Terence Rattigan and Oscar Wilde, as we go back to Tom Littler's drawing those comparisons, that these views may originate from their position, of course, in society as homosexuals, which, they had to be secretive about. So the pretenses and pressures that brought with it are reflected, I think, in the darker undercurrent in these comedies of manners. And it was a daring production at the Donmar to bring that out so graphically. It's interesting that the critics were not necessarily reconciled that the balance was right in the end. They appreciated and respected that, but they thought somehow that it just leaves it not as funny and as bright and brilliant as it could be. What do you think?
That wasn't my experience of it. I found it personally very, very funny. And the audience found it very, very funny.
Yeah.
I didn't even read it as Elliot being abusive towards Amanda as much as they both being in a mutually very violent, very toxic, abusive relationship in which they are inextricably drawn to one another with a great passion, but it's an unhealthy, violent edge. So for me, it was more of a portrayal of those unhealthy, horrible relationships. And I wonder, for some of the teens in the audience as well, they probably have friends who are in relationships that they wish they weren't in and so on. So I didn't feel like it detracted from the humor at all, because they also lent in very, very heavily to the physical comedy and the slapstick. That scene in the Parisian parlor at the end, the night after Elliot and Amanda have had their fight and their respective spouses have shown up, and there's the serving of coffee.
Yeah.
And Elliot doesn't get served coffee by Amanda. She stands and she pours it on the silver tray. Again, the audience loved how naughty that was. I even heard somebody say, "Oh man, the carpet," because the black coffee spilt off the tray onto this beautiful cream rug. And then Amanda throws the brioche at him, and the audience found that hilarious. That was all funny. And then Elliot, in defiance, picking up said tray and pouring the coffee into his cup from the tray, picking up a brioche from the floor, slapping it in the slab of butter, putting it in the jam pot and stuffing it in his mouth. And the audience were incapable with laughter at how this 50-year-old man is acting like a 5-year-old. I thought that was just exceptionally funny.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's true that it's mutually toxic, and Rachel Sterling as Amanda gives as good as she gets, as you described earlier, and she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's big, she's physically imposing.
Yeah, imperious, fiery, but flawed, fantastic. And Stephen Maugham was an interesting portrait because from the start, I think you see the darkness in him.
Oh, yeah.
In the very first scenes with Sybil, his new wife, it's in the script. He says some casually critical things to her, but in this performance, they were delivered with an unbelievable venom. Really cruel.
He was really cruel and nasty. That meat cleaver. Does he say he wants to?
Yeah, I'd like to cut your head off with a meat axe.
That's vicious.
This is to your new wife on your honeymoon. You think the original Noël Coward could pull this off with some kind of wit, but in Stephen Mangham's performance and in this production, and deliberately, there's a real danger and darkness in him, which comes out, of course, which is also why it's interesting that there's a question, I suppose, about why Amanda would keep going back as she does at the end of the play. And in this day and age, you would be questioning how she could do that, go back to this abusive relationship, though people, of course, are drawn to do. But it is harder to dress up as the triumph of love.
Oh, it definitely isn't the triumph of love at all. Because I would ask exactly the same question of Elliot. Why does Elliot keep going back to Amanda? It's not one way, this thing. Either of them, you go, really? You're going to go into this toxic cycle again? Frankly, you deserve each other.
That's absolutely right.
Was my take on that. Off you go and you destroy one another's lives and stop pulling other people into it. And of course, it becomes a cycle of violence, doesn't it? Because then the two estranged spouses start having at each other as well.
Yeah, so all of that plays into what we were saying about Coward's view of the destructive nature of these relationships, a pretty pessimistic view of love and marriage. If you miss Private Lives, it might come to NT Live at some point. In fact, highly likely to, given the cast. Can't resist making a plug for the Play Podcast episode. If you want to know more about this fascinating play, then check out our episode on Private Lives with Oliver Soden. Jodi, thank you so much. It's been a delight. And let's do it again.
Yeah, let's definitely. Thoroughly enjoyed that.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Play Review. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear what you think. So please visit patreon.com/theplaypodcast to share your views on this production or any other play that you've seen. See you next time.